Hey guys, welcome back to today's video. Today is Friday, February 26th, 2021, and today we're going to be exploring a 2024 electoral map without the impact of President Trump and the overall complete electorate shift that he has given us over the past 4 years, the complete rewrite of the American political system, and pretty much just looking at the entire political process without Donald Trump having any type of influence on certain states, any type of movement in certain states as a response to Donald Trump being on the ballot, for better or for worse, for the GOP and the Democratic Party. What we're going to be looking at is a completely different type of electoral map. And while many states may remain competitive, because I'm going to rate and characterize all of them, at the same time, I would also like to point out that, the margins do matter. And that's what I want you guys to take a look at. When you're watching this video, you may see Nevada still remain as a swing state, but look at the margin. You may still see Texas remain as a swing state, but look at the margin. So as we go through this map, that's one thing I want you guys to point out. And we're going to actually take a little bit of a trip through history here to take a look at what the electoral map looked like prior to Donald Trump and why we'd likely see something very similar had Donald Trump not been involved in politics too heavily. So here's the 2012 election results when President Obama won re-election over Governor Mitt Romney, 332 electoral votes for the Democrats, 206 for Romney, the Republicans. 62 million votes for Obama, 59 million votes for Romney. For reference, this election, Biden got 81 million votes, Trump got 74 million votes. And even though the margin was larger, both raw vote-wise and percentage-wise for the popular vote, Joe Biden won less electoral votes. Well, this was largely due to the fact that Obama was able to win Florida, Ohio, and Iowa, 3 states that were not won by President Biden. However, Biden was able to carry Arizona and Georgia, 2 states that Obama wasn't able to capture either in his elections. So either of his 2 elections. And, looking at the 2012 map, we start to see the old solidification for certain states, the old bases in certain regions of the state, of the country. And, while certain states were trending in one way or another, you cannot deny the impact Obama had on the Rust Belt. And, Obama's impact here was taking a very competitive region and making it likely for the Democratic Party. In 2008, practically safe. Double-digit margins across all 3 states, Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania in 2008. Iowa was won in 2008 by 9.5%. Looking at the margins in these states in 2012, one could argue now it would still be pretty solid for the Democratic Party. And I would agree with that. But there also were some significant areas where Trump considerably underperformed Romney, even relative to the 2016 versus 2020 election, 2012 election. Looking at the comparison, Trump still underperformed him, even in a red, arguably, very solid year for the GOP. They won a trifecta. And, Texas, Georgia, Arizona, all states that have shifted to the left, largely due to Donald Trump, but also in part due to demographic shifts. And while demographics will continue to benefit the Democratic Party in these states, they were expedited in terms of how much bluer they got because of Donald Trump. So what we're actually going to be taking a look at is some of these key states. We are going to characterize all of the states I would say are considered to be safe. Safe straight off the bat. That means a 15-point margin of victory or more. And I know you may be surprised to see some states, not characterized as safe, such as Mississippi or Kansas or Montana, but we'll talk about why. Because Donald Trump certainly had an impact on a number of these states and made them much more competitive. Solid for the GOP. But looking at some of those safe Democratic states, none of them really are going to change. I would say maybe Oregon could revert back to being likely. Washington could potentially revert back to being likely, which means we're talking 13-14% margins of victory, the same one you would see in Indiana or Missouri. Just it wouldn't be considered safe straight off the bat. And I know it seems a little bit weird, but it's all about the way that the margins work. And don't be too surprised just looking at it. That's just how it's going to look for at least right now. But looking at our electoral map, what does it seem like? Well, it seems as if without Donald Trump, there are a lot more swing states. But let's fill in the likelies. We know how Washington and Oregon are going to go. We have a very good idea of how Montana, Missouri, Indiana, Mississippi, South Carolina, Alaska, and Kansas are going to go. The reason why I characterized all of these as likely states is because they were in 2012. And some of them were, but some of them weren't. In 2008, Indiana actually went blue. And, the states did go to George W. Bush, but George W. Bush maxed out the support amongst minority voters and maxed out the support in certain regions of the country that Donald Trump was able to bring back, but other Republicans were not. And, I don't see that same type of support really dragging along for candidates that weren't George W. Bush. George W. Bush was able to ride a different time period into victory. His policies now probably wouldn't work too well on the national level. I don't think that, John McCain's or Mitt Romney's would either, but I think if the GOP had remained under that sort of establishment view, that sort of more moderate Republican tone, more conservative in the way that they come across, no pun intended. I mean, just the way that they were very, I would say, quieter than Trump, and also a less enthusiastic campaign style, but also a much more reserved one, which helped them in certain ways for debates. Romney absolutely obliterated Obama in the first debate. Trump never at any point obliterated either Hillary Clinton or Joe Biden in a singular debate. I mean, even left-leaning polls had showed Romney had won the debate by a margin of 30, 40 points in the first debate. So looking at the skills of Romney and McCain, while McCain may not have debated too well, we still saw those moderate Republicans who weren't super outspoken still perform well when it came down to speeches and rallies. And, while Donald Trump did perform better than Romney and McCain, you also have to realize, that was for a reason. He tapped into a base that was previously untapped, which is why our map looks different, which means that the likely states would likely remain as Minnesota from the 2012 election, would likely remain as Michigan from the 2012 election, possibly even Wisconsin. I think Pennsylvania would become a lean state. And, historically speaking, these states have been competitive. Looking at 2004 before Obama, well, these states were won by very narrow amounts. But they were still won by larger than Biden in 2 of the 3 states. Wisconsin was just narrowly under where I don't know why I said that, where Biden was in the 2020 election. But, given the fact that the state wouldn't have this all of a sudden shift, and the fact that George W. Bush did very well in certain pretty solid Democratic regions of the country. California was won by single digits by John Kerry. Maryland was won just by 13 percentage points. Delaware just by 7.6. New Jersey just by 6.5. The margins here were very, very close. And, looking at 2024, what I'm expecting to see is that these states do shift to the left, and that the Democratic Party does start out with the advantage. They had won all of these states, since the year 2000, with the exception of, Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania after the 2016 election. And, looking at the way that they were going, I would say without Donald Trump, we probably would see these states remain in the Democratic column for decades. I mean, maybe not for decades, actually. Maybe for another decade. And then it would start to catch up the fact that the minority vote was moving out. But you cannot deny that Trump certainly flipped a lot of those white working class voters that made it so Obama didn't need to win, or at least drive up turnout the same way that what we saw in 2020 in terms of the inner cities. Obama won largely for a reason. Not only did he win the minority voters, but he won a lot of the white working class, a base that Donald Trump tapped into and has remained and kept within the Republican Party's grasp for the past 4 years, and possibly continuing on. However, Donald Trump's addition to the electoral map certainly made states more competitive and states more democratic. Wisconsin, Michigan, and Pennsylvania may have been an increase for the Democratic Party with Donald Trump being on the ballot. But now Colorado and New Mexico and Virginia are states that I think could take a turn towards the GOP. Without Donald Trump, there wouldn't be this one candidate who pushed away so many suburban voters, specifically white college-educated voters. Wisconsin, Michigan, Pennsylvania, these states, I would say, aren't directly comparable to some other regions. They typically vote in unison, as do Virginia, Colorado, and New Mexico. But they have opposite effects here, which is what is interesting about the margins on this map. I think without Donald Trump having an impact on the electorate, Michigan would likely be more pro-Democrat than Colorado at this point. And while the Democratic Party undoubtedly would have made gains, it probably wouldn't be a likely state to begin with. Probably lean. New Mexico, we could probably see, a likely margin for right now, but it could go down into lean. Colorado would be competitive without Donald Trump stepping on the scale. But I don't think that the Democratic Party would still remain the favorite in Florida. The Republican Party was still trending there prior to the 2016 election. Donald Trump just solidified it, but Democrats statewide here don't always perform too well. And even in 2018, which was arguably a very strong year for the Democratic Party, they still ended up losing a governor's seat in Florida by a very narrow amount, but still losing, and also lost a Senate seat with the Democratic incumbent Bill Nelson, who had won by a very large amount in 2012. We can actually take a look at the 2012 Senate election map because, looking at that margin for Bill Nelson, he should not have lost. He won by double digits in 2012, lost in 2018. Narrow, but still a defeat. So I would say Florida probably wouldn't remain with the GOP. It was just on that pathway. But the Democratic Party probably wouldn't have as strong of a grip on Georgia and and Arizona, as they had previously in the 2020 election. When these states flipped, it was done for the first time in Arizona since 96 and Georgia since 92. Looking at the shift in these states specifically from 2012 to 2016, you can see why Trump was actually a weak candidate in these 3 states, Georgia, Texas, and Arizona. Clinton improved by 6 points in Arizona, 7 points in Texas, and 3 points in Georgia, despite almost every other state shifting to the right. The 2016 election was a complete, huge surprise to the Democratic Party, and yet Hillary Clinton was still able to improve significantly in Texas and Arizona, and also Georgia. Comparing 2020 versus 2016, we see the same trend in these states. Biden improves in Arizona by 4, Texas by 3, and Georgia by 5. These states were getting more and more Democratic as Donald Trump was on the ballot. Looking at 2008 versus 2012, the states actually got more Republican. While they got more Democratic from 2008 to 2004 to 2008, you also have to realize that George W. Bush maximized minority support and Sunbelt support, that he was able to win Georgia by 17. Looking at the margins in the past, I do have to point out that the times were very different. And while demographics have continued to favor the Democratic Party, Donald Trump and Stacey Abrams expedited the process. But I think without Donald Trump, there probably would not be a super prominent Stacey Abrams. I think she could have done well, but we would be talking about a scenario where she would be running for governor possibly under President Hillary Clinton at that point. I don't think any other Republican besides Trump could have beaten Hillary Clinton in the 2016 election. And I think that as a result, many Democrats would have seen adverse effects in the midterm elections. So I wouldn't really discuss Stacey Abrams too intently with this. I would say Georgia, Arizona would remain with the GOP, because while they have gotten closer, certainly, not enough to flip. Donald Trump's impact on these 3 states was that he made them bluer, which is why Texas I would not characterize as tilt or lean as I have in other 2024 election predictions. I would characterize it as likely for the GOP. Plainly put, I would put it as likely. And there are some other regions in the country where Donald Trump certainly had a negative impact. Nebraska's 2nd District is also an example. I think without Trump, the Democratic Party would not do too well in Nebraska's 2nd District. It's not that the region has gotten very solid for the Democrats. It's more so that they're upset with the way that Donald Trump has handled his presidency. But I also think that the Democratic Party would be solid in Maine. They would be able to win, this state possibly by a safe margin. I would say actually safe. They would win Maine's 2nd District by a likely margin. At the end of the day, Donald Trump was the only Republican to split the state of Maine, at least split the entire district from the rest of the state for the first time in history. Maine has never done that prior to the 2016 election, and Donald Trump certainly flipped it by a pretty considerable amount. Looking at the compare tool, we can compare the previous elections. Let's see here. Let's go ahead and just refresh the page, and then we can go ahead and just compare the past elections versus past elections. 2012 versus 2016. Looking at the Maine 2nd Congressional District, it shifted by 18.8%. Donald Trump had a huge impact on Maine's 2nd District. And I think that looking at it now, I would say the Democratic Party actually starts out with a pretty strong advantage. But looking at Virginia, Donald Trump definitely made Northern Virginia much, much bluer. Honestly, he made it much, much bluer. Looking at the state's electoral history, the Democratic Party had not fared too well in Virginia in years past. Looking at the overall results from 2004 and previously before the 2008 election, Virginia had been a pretty solid state for the Republicans. +8 in Virginia in 2004, +8 again in 2000. Even in 96, it went to Dole. Even in 92, it went to Bush. Even in 88, it went to Bush again by 21. Under Reagan, 25. Even in 1980, Reagan won it by 13 points. And then you take a look at 1976, even then, when Texas was blue, Georgia went to the Democrats by 34 points, Arkansas by 30, West Virginia went by 16. The state of Virginia refused to go to the Democratic Party. So Obama was actually the first Democrat to win Virginia since Lyndon B. Johnson. And he won it by 6.3 points. But once we got to 2012, it reverted back to becoming a swing state. And while the demographics do benefit the Democratic Party, you cannot ignore that Donald Trump expedited the state's Democratic support. 2017 was a perfect example of that. The special elections, perfect example. 2018 midterms in Virginia, perfect example. 2019 state elections, perfect example. And the 2020 election, Joe Biden becomes the first Democrat to win the state by double digits since 1944. So looking at Virginia, where does this put the Democrats? It may be lean, but it's still a victory. This puts the Democrats at 264 electoral votes. The non-Trump GOP candidate, whoever that might be, is at 225. And while the GOP may still have support, I still think that there are regions of this country that are pretty solid for the GOP now that could still be pro-Democratic. And looking at the election history, looking at Iowa and Ohio, Iowa was won by nearly 10 points in 2016. In Ohio, 8 points. Let's take a look at it in history. In Iowa, in 2012, it went to Obama by 6 points. Ohio went by 3. In 2008, Iowa was won by Obama by 10 points. Ohio by 5. In 2004, however, Bush narrowly won it. Despite doing very well in almost every other state, narrowly won Iowa. Ohio went to Bush by just 2 points. In 2000, Iowa went to Al Gore. Bush won Ohio by 3.5. In 96, Clinton won it by 10 in Iowa and 6 in Ohio. In 92, 6 in Iowa and 2 in Ohio. Looking at 1988, Dukakis won the state of Iowa. And looking at 84, Reagan still only won the state by 7.4%. This state in particular, Iowa. Ohio has always voted with the election winner prior to 2020. At least since, since a long time, since Richard Nixon. Before then, JFK. But looking at Iowa specifically, Donald Trump tapped into this rural vote here. This white working class vote. Specifically, the white and also uneducated voters, but I don't like using that term because, just because they don't have a college degree, I wouldn't call them uneducated. It just means they don't have a college degree. So I would say non-college graduates. And, looking at the exit polling data relative to 2012, there's a reason the state went from going to Obama in 2012 by, 6 points and then voting for Trump by 8 and 8 again in 2020. So Iowa, I actually think without Trump being on the ballot, without Trump being involved in politics, the Democratic Party would still have an electoral advantage in the state. I think the GOP would inevitably catch up in the state of Ohio to a point where they would become the prominent party. But looking at Iowa, I do think without Trump on the ballot, actually as we saw in 2018, the Democratic Party, surprisingly, does well. And that puts the Democrats at 270. But I already was going to characterize New Hampshire with the Democratic Party because while Donald Trump did make the state likely for the Democrats in 2020, it probably would become a swing state back again in 24, even with Trump involved in politics, and especially without him. It's always been a competitive state. But the GOP probably would still hold on to the state of North Carolina. While it would always be in reach for the Democrats, they probably wouldn't do super well in it time and time again. And the final state brings me to the state of Nevada, a state that went to Obama by, I believe, 5 points. In 2020, went to Biden by 2.4. And in 2016, can you guess the margin? It was one of the two. It was a 2.4% margin for Hillary Clinton. The state practically changed, absolutely nothing. Looking at the compare thing, we can actually see here, if we refresh once again, we can compare the previous elections. Nevada got 0.027% more Republican. So what was that state that was 0.0017? Maybe Nevada it just eventually, moved over there. I guess I don't see. Yeah, I guess so. Nevada released some more numbers, 0.027% more Republican, but that's practically 0.03, means absolutely nothing. So looking at 2024, what would be the map without Donald Trump's influence on the electoral map? Honestly, I'd say lean for the Democratic Party, exactly where it was in the 2020 election. And, that may be coincidence, but also the fact that the state was historically a swing state. It wasn't always a likely state. It still was competitive, and, it went to the Republicans as recently as 2004. Almost went to them in 2016 and 2020. Obama outperformed Biden and Clinton twice, even though Hillary Clinton actually outperformed him in terms of Hispanic voters, and Joe Biden in terms of raw vote share, or raw vote count, and also, the states that he was able to flip in a very similar region. He made Colorado, New Mexico much bluer than they were under Obama. Arizona flipped. Utah significantly bluer relative to 2012. California, much bluer. Oregon, Washington, much bluer. But Nevada actually got redder relative to 2012. You can actually take a look at that here. And thankfully, we can do that using this tool. The only part, really, of this entire section outside of Montana, Wyoming, North, South Dakota, Nebraska, looking here, the only part, Nevada, the only state that got more Republican. Utah got 28 points. Arizona got 9. Colorado 8, Texas 10, Kansas 7, New Mexico 1, even Oklahoma 0.5, Idaho 1, Oregon 4, Washington 4. So looking at the state of Nevada, if anything, I would say lean for the Democratic Party. So as you can see, without Donald Trump being someone prominent in the Republican Party or on the political stage entirely, completely erase President Trump from all of our political discourse, we will see some states revert back to being pretty solid for the GOP and others pretty solid for the Democratic Party. This brings us to a more competitive map than 2020, but a very strange one given our current political environment. You would not expect this map in any type of scenario, unless maybe a popular governor ran from Iowa and narrowly won the election. But other than that, you would rarely ever see Wisconsin and Michigan likely, Iowa and Pennsylvania lean, while the Democrats were losing Ohio. But that's the reality of where our demographics have trended, but also what our map would likely look like without Donald Trump on the ballot, without Donald Trump at all in our political history. So the 2020 map definitely takes me by surprise, and a number of you guys, I would say, by surprise. If you're looking at it now, comparing it to what we expected for 2020 and 2016, this was far off from anything that we expected. But 280 to 258 still benefits the Democratic Party, but a lot more states are up for grabs than they were in the 2020 election, specifically Colorado and Virginia and New Hampshire, all states that were won by likely margins that have reverted back to being lean states. The Republican Party, doing worse, though, in the Rust Belt. Wisconsin, Michigan, doing better for the Democrats than Colorado, Virginia, and New Hampshire. Complete opposite of what happened in 2020. So looking at this map, there's a lot of things that are very interesting. You can go ahead and recreate this on yapms.com. The link is in the description down below. But overall, it was really fun to make and really fun to discuss what our map would look like in 2024 without Trump's impact on the election. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. Make sure to comment down suggestions below. Subscribe on the left if you haven't already, and check out the Instagram and Twitter. At the bottom left of the screen, there's also a Discord server for you to go ahead and join. On the screen, there's a video you can watch and then a playlist for my 2024 election videos. Again, thank you guys so much for watching, and I will see you all tomorrow.